This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for February 5th, 2019, and I am your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
Hey, what's up, Cuboids?
Cristina Roach.
Hey, everyone.
And producer Pat.
Hey, checkers.
We have a great show for you today. Adam is going to talk about Let's Talk. And then Cristina is going to explore and answer who is Cecilia Payne. I don't know. Let's find out. But first, wipers up or down? Pat?
Right. So I've mentioned many times on the show that I listen to a lot of podcasts. One of the reasons I listen to so many is because I also do a lot of walking. Last year, I attempted to walk 15K a day every day for 365 days in a row. I made it 273 days before I had a small incident with a distracted driver and needed to take some time to heal.
Oof.
So you notice stuff when you do that much walking. A couple of summers ago, I noticed that many sidewalk slabs in Toronto have the date that they were installed stamped on them.
Oh.
I started looking for the earliest date in my neighborhood. The oldest one I found was 1957. Other people also got into it. John Abrams, the original host of TRC, sent me a picture of one he found in San Diego, dated 1898. Anyways, I digress. The point is, I notice things when I'm walking. Lately, we've been getting some really lousy weather in Toronto, and we're supposed to get some worse weather tomorrow. But I have continued to walk every day, and what I recently noticed was that ahead of a storm, like 30% of cars I see parked in my neighborhood leave their windshield wipers in the up position.
I've noticed that more than usual lately, too.
Right. It seems like more and more people are doing it. Of course, it could also be that now that I've noticed it, I'm noticing it more.
Ooh, interesting.
Or maybe we're just getting a lot more snow than we typically do.
True.
Yes.
So I set out to do some research on whether it's a good idea to lift your wipers ahead of a storm, which you think would be pretty straightforward, but not so much. I found a lot of opinions on this.
Were you actually down a rabbit hole with this one?
I would say so. I found opinions from companies that replace windshields, the Weather Channel, wiper manufacturers, auto associations, mechanics, car magazines. Like I said, I found lots of opinions on this. I also saw a couple of not very scientific online polls where readers were asked to vote. One done by the Farmer's Almanac, which, of course, is not very scientific, but they did do a poll. 425 votes for leaving the wipers up, 197 votes for leaving them down.
Wow.
The other was by New York Public Radio, WNYC. They got 312 votes. 63% said up, 37% said down.
Wow.
Fascinating.
So this surprised me. Like I said, I sort of pegged it at about 3 out of 10 cars since I've been paying attention to this lately. Maybe people looking for information in this are more likely to be on team raised wipers. I actually don't know.
That's fair. Yeah. So you seek it out, and therefore you find a poll and you vote for the thing you're doing. Otherwise, you wouldn't even look it up in the first place, right?
Right. So what about you guys? Wipers up or wipers down? And do you see this a lot?
I've never done it, or maybe I did it like once. I saw this start probably close to 10 years ago at my office. There was one guy that was doing it. So me and my buddy Halden, we always refer to it as the Larry, I won't say his last name, as the Larry something thing. And it spread. Like it was like one car was doing it, and then like 5 cars were doing it. And then by the next year, it's like, a third to half of the cars in the parking lot are doing it, and they all do it now. And I'd only sort of briefly looked into it and thought, well, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, but if there's ice, I'll just chip it off.
And I don't drive to work anymore, and I park indoors in the evenings anyway. But when I did drive, I did notice some people doing it, and then I started doing it because it really seemed easier when I came back to the car and had to then wipe away snow or ice.
Yeah, right. Cristina?
I'm a wipers down girl. I just feel like leaving them up like that, you're just leaving yourself open to something happening, them breaking, or if it's windy. I feel like a little bit of patience and the defroster is all you kind of need.
All right, so clearly not everyone agrees on this, and the internet is no different. So if you look at the show notes, you'll see I did a fair amount of reading on this. Here seems to be the main points being made in the arguments. Pros of leaving your wipers up. Clearing snow and ice from your windshield is easier. Your blades won't become frozen to the glass, and therefore you won't risk damaging the motor or other parts of the wiper system if you accidentally left your wipers on when you parked. Cons: lifting the blades too far could damage the springs, causing them to no longer fit against the glass properly. Wiper blades left up could become encased in ice, making them even harder to clean.
Oh, jeez.
That it looks ridiculous.
That's a good point.
Wow, people care that much about their cars.
Right.
They're not McLarens.
And finally, heavy winds, ice storms, or debris could bend or damage your wipers, or they could be snapped back into place with enough force to crack your windshield.
Oh, wow.
So, clearing the snow and ice would be easier. This seems entirely plausible, as Darren pointed out. Your blades won't become frozen to the glass. Again, this seems to make sense. And it definitely seems to be that the number one cause of damage to wiper systems is people who have accidentally left their wipers on when they park.
I've totally ruined the rubbers on my wipers a number of times in a number of different cars from having them frozen in ice, and then I chipped it and I kind of hit the wiper and it ripped off.
Right.
That has totally happened to me a number of times. So, if you can avoid that, that's a plus for sure.
So on the con side, wiper blades becoming enclosed in ice makes them harder to clean. Again, this one seems plausible if you get a bad enough ice storm. Lifting them too far could damage the springs. Most of the material I read says this just isn't true if you carefully lift them into the up position. Now, not everyone agrees on this. The Canadian Automobile Association in Quebec, for example, and several sources point out that really high winds could put additional strain on the springs. So the claim that it looks ridiculous, well, this is a matter of opinion. But the last point seems to be where you have to do a little risk versus reward calculation. Yeah. Several sources suggest a windshield wiper can be snapped back into place by heavy winds or debris with enough force to damage the wipers or even crack your windshield. And that would be a serious pain. Yeah. For that reason, many of these articles suggest it just isn't worth it lifting up your wipers.
Oh.
I know that isn't a very satisfying answer, but the jury's out on this one a bit. You have to ask whether the convenience you get out of lifting your wipers is worth the risk of potential damage. So what should you do? Well, that one's not so easily answered either. I saw articles suggesting you should wrap your wipers in plastic bags ahead of a storm.
Oh my God.
Some sources suggest coating your wipers with rubbing alcohol since it has a freezing point of around minus 88 degrees Celsius.
Well, that's kind of what your windshield wiper fluid does.
Right. Another suggests putting old socks on your wiper blades.
Oh, those could just freeze to the blades, couldn't they?
Like I said, there are a lot of opinions out there on this. Yeah. One thing seems to be clear, though. Damage to your wiper system has two main causes. Number one, leaving your wipers on when you park your car. So, get in the habit of always turning off your wipers every time you park. While many systems have fail-safes to shut power off to the motor if it cannot complete a wiper cycle, leaving your wipers on when you park can cause extensive damage the next time you start it. And number two, the second most common cause of wiper failure is letting snow and ice pack up at the bottom of your windshield. This can prevent the wipers from completing a cycle and will damage something called linkages. When clearing windshields before heading out, use the brush or your hand or whatever you need to dig out all that snow under the arms. And many sources suggest take your time. Let the defroster do its work and take the time to properly clean your windshield. It will go a long way to save your wipers, and it's also going to probably make your drive much safer. So there you have it.
That's interesting, Pat, and I'm fairly impatient when it comes to driving, and I guess I don't respect my car as much as a lot of people. So one thing I'll do is, for almost any amount of freezing or snow on my car, I will say, well, I hope that that's enough that the wipers can still get through it. And before I even attempt to go outside and scrape anything, I just put the wipers on, and then if it doesn't work, then I go out and I scrape it. That's probably putting strain on the wipers that it shouldn't.
I'll admit I did not realize your winter wipers could go while your car is off.
Well, they don't go while the car is off. It's just when you start it, right? Is that the idea?
That's the idea. So if your wipers freeze to your windshield and you've left your wipers on, then you go start your car, the wipers start automatically.
That's what you meant.
And then
they start, but they don't move because they're stuck, and then they consistently have resistance. And okay, sorry. From the ups and downs of protecting your wipers to the pros and cons of Let's Talk campaigns. Adam, let's talk about Let's Talk.
Sure, Darren. On the morning of January 30th, when I arrived at my workplace, I checked my phone and saw that I had received a few messages over Facebook Messenger from some coworkers. The preview stated in all lowercase text, "Please send this to all your," that's UR for your, "friends. 5 cents will be donated for every send." Oh, I thought, looks like there's a spam chain letter going around, and those two mutual Facebook friends both got caught by it. It reminded me a lot of chain letters I'd seen over the years, but I was a bit surprised to see two of my coworkers who worked in IT fall for such an obvious scam in 2019. Actually, it wasn't a scam. It's a real thing. January 30th is Bell Let's Talk Day, and Bell really was donating 5 cents for every person who viewed the video that was in this message that was sent. So, a little backstory on this for our non-Canadian listeners who may not be aware. Bell Let's Talk Day is an annual advertising campaign put on by Bell, which is a large telecommunications company here in Canada. They do phones, they do TV, they own radio stations, they own TV stations, they do it all. Now, the stated goal of the campaign is to raise awareness and combat stigma around mental health. Basically, they encourage people to talk, tweet, share, call, use social media and telecommunication services to their full extent to talk about mental health, to make people more aware that this issue is facing many Canadians. This has been going on since 2010. So, back to what I was originally talking about, these chain letter type messages. Now, years ago, probably over 20 years ago, I had a friend forward me an email asking if it was a real thing. Now, I don't recall the specifics, but as far as I recall, the claim was that every time an email was forwarded, Bill Gates, or I think it was Microsoft, would donate some fixed amount of money. So I think it was $1. Money to charity, okay? So there's been a lot like this. So his forward wasn't so much falling for it, but rather who was asking me, who he considered to be one of his more tech-savvy or extremely online friends, if it was even feasible. Does this make sense? And his skepticism was well-placed. It wasn't feasible that even Microsoft at the time would be able to track all of these emails. So if they'd wanted to, Microsoft would have been technically capable of tracking such an email spread through only Hotmail accounts, because they owned Hotmail at the time, but this would likely require quite a bit of work on their part and potentially raise some security concerns. Now, Microsoft also runs most people's computers on the software many use for email, in this case, Microsoft Outlook. So this might have been part of why some people fell for this email scam and found it believable, but this would be technically difficult and a huge privacy nightmare. So if you consider the huge number of different ways people access email through websites of various clients, doing so will require software to probably analyze text on one's computer, do some sort of like image to text recognition, and monitoring email on a network level would certainly work, but this would be something that only an internet service provider would be able to do. Microsoft's not really in that business. But
so you're saying China could probably do it, and that's why they're going to beat us?
Probably with some Rogers traffic.
In the case of this particular Bell thing,
yeah,
it really comes down to a single video and how many times it's been viewed, which seems pretty reasonable for them to be able to track, right?
There's a lot of different ways. I'll get into that a bit more later, but there's a lot of different ways they can track, and if you break them down, they all make a little more sense than some of these chain letters. But there are variants on that chain letter where it actually is plausible that someone would have been able to track and donate based on this, but they just weren't. For example, I was looking at Snopes, and it led me to a 1997 email chain about a young girl suffering from cancer, and the claim was that 3 cents would be donated to the American Cancer Society every time it was forwarded. People, no doubt, forwarded this altruistically. In this particular case, a person was told to CC the American Cancer Society's email address. So then they would see, they would have a record of everything. They could, in theory, donate that money. So technically feasible, but it wasn't a real thing, and there's no way for people to tell, right? The problem here, the girl in question did not exist, so the chain letter was a hoax.
What?
Yeah, so there was a similar one, claimed 7 cents donated to Make-A-Wish Foundation, same thing. So there's a lot of variants on this. You can find about that on the Snopes website, linked in the show notes, trcpodcast.com.
What is the point of a chain letter like that then?
People think it's funny to see their thing go viral, probably,
Okay.
just to, as, I've never started a chain letter, but I've certainly thought it would be a fun thing to
Like a
do.
prank.
So it doesn't, there's 7 billion people on the planet. You just need a few of them to come up with an idea that's sort of viral enough to spread, and then if it's good enough, it'll just go around. It'll get a life on its own, right?
So I was listening to this story about PewDiePie, who I guess is the most viewed YouTube guy ever, and about a hacker named Hacker Giraffe, who hacked, I think it was about 80,000 printers, and he just sent a note saying, "Watch PewDiePie," and essentially his Twitter account.
Wow.
Because he was, I guess they're right now there's this huge fight between PewDiePie, who I've never seen, and this Indian YouTube channel that are fighting for dominancy, like the first to be the #1 viewed channel. And this guy who did the hack was so overwhelmed by the notoriety that he got for this that he went on to do another hack. I guess just the idea of, as you said, going viral is I guess it can be really
it's
a rush. Yeah.
Probably similar to, why do people make computer viruses? A lot of them are not necessarily nefarious, but they're just, they send a silly message or something like that. So other variants on the chain letter, more recently they use social media because, email chain letters, I think people kind of figured that out a while ago, though some people probably still fall for it. Now, one in particular claims that Bill Gates will give you $5,000 for sharing a message. Like, that's insane, but, Bill Gates has a lot of money, so maybe it's true if I don't really think about the numbers and what this really means. So it includes a clearly doctored image of Bill Gates holding a sign promising this, and it's from, I think, Reddit, AMA.
Really?
Yeah.
He's like, I am giving money out to really poor people to stop them from dying from poverty.
Yeah. And this is where things get a little tricky, as on social media, the idea that such a thing could be tracked goes from implausible to not only possible, but as we will see, something that actually gets done. So Facebook could very well track shares on a message or on a video like we saw, like we're going to see for Bell Let's Talk. Even Microsoft could share it if there was an original post that just got reshared. And this is where the specifics get tricky. So if a chain letter says something like copy and paste this message into your status, or like save this photo and reshare it, it's less likely that it's something that someone could be tracking, but by that same logic, it's harder for a person to find if there's an authentic source. So the issue being that if there's an original post shared, one could easily click through to the original and see if it's coming from, say, Microsoft or Bill Gates. And a copy-paste part sort of obscures that, but that's part of the essence of what makes the chain letter believable. Now, this reminds me of a book I read a few years ago, Who Owns the Future by Jaron Lanier. Now, he's a smart guy and has interesting ideas. The book wasn't totally great, but he basically talks about
it wasn't totally great. I think we talked about it on the show.
I think we did. He basically talks about the risks of tech giants like Facebook and Google growing too big and the problems it would cause as they use our data to get rich and popular, and it causes sort of a big economic divide. Part of his solution was for people's data or online contributions to be tracked so that they could be monetized in a sort of microtransaction way to avoid people falling into poverty. That's not really how the internet works, though, because you can't actually track where content originated. A web page can copy and paste content or re-upload an image, and it can be tracked to the original. But he envisioned an internet where this was possible, where content was traceable and link backs were absolute, and these exist in some places, but not everywhere. And to me, if this was possible, it would mean a less open and less free internet. So I kind of had a problem when he suggested that. And he was involved with the inception of the internet, and he stated that he wanted things to go in a different way and wanted the internet to originally start in a different way for it to be sort of traceable and have this possibility. Now, these days, Small individual websites are less and less common, while social media giants are only getting bigger. And people don't talk about how many visits their blog or website gets, but they talk about how many followers their account has, how many likes they get. So things have really changed quickly, where social media really is the place where people can get popular quick. A post on Twitter or Facebook can be shared and easily tracked back to the original, but this is very hard to do with a website. And when I talk about viral content here on the show, I'll often be able to give you numbers of likes, shares, retweets, or whatever to get an idea of how that content's being shared. And this brings us to the reality of the Bell Let's Talk campaign. This video was in Facebook Messenger message, but the video could be tracked down to, an official Bell account. It was shared by 2 people, but it's totally trackable. A copy-pasted message couldn't do this. Similarly, with the help of hashtags on social media, one can very easily track everything posted using a certain hashtag. Now, this is precisely what Bell is doing with the Bell Let's Talk campaign. Now, I wonder if people are becoming more gullible about chain letter scams related to donations as a result of the Bell Let's Talk campaign. It's pretty hard to measure this because I think they're generally becoming more skeptical as technology becomes more common as well. Now, on social media, the originators of that content have a lot of other unseen statistics which can be seen. These analytics are useful for Facebook, Twitter, and other social media companies as they're used to tell a user how their paid content is doing. This is a response to the money, right? There's a monetary incentive to having people be able to track it. So it's easy to track it on these platforms, and these platforms are becoming sort of the way people do business. And this works well for Bell because it's an ad campaign. At the end of the day, it's about making money. So it's the Bell Let's Talk campaign. It's hardly the Talking About Mental Health Day campaign. Every time someone tweets or shares or does anything related to this day, it's advertisement for Bell. Some paid, some free. So even high-profile celebrities like William Shatner and the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau have shared messages related to this campaign. At my workplace, there were messages about the campaign sent by email and shown on screens in the lobby. Bell certainly wasn't paying for any of those. They are donating 5 cents to charity for any of the following kinds of transactions. On Twitter, each use of the hashtag or a view of a Bell Let's Talk video. On Facebook, each use of a photo frame. So they have this special kind of photo frame that you could put on your Facebook profile picture, or a view of a video like the one I mentioned. On Instagram, it's each view of a video. It's worth noting that it's impossible to natively share anything from another user on Instagram, making this promotion difficult. On Snapchat, it's each use of a geo filter or a video view. And they even have phone calls and text messages. For every phone call made on a Bell cell phone or landline, it's 5 cents, or every text message sent on a Bell cell phone, 5 cents are donated.
Wow, that's extensive.
Oh yeah, it's a huge campaign. It's a really big thing. So some of these, like call or text, don't really advertise for Bell, but they are using their system. But obviously, people generally aren't paying 5 cents for every text message. A lot of people have unlimited for things like that. Advertising is usually calculated in cost per 1,000 impressions, which is confusingly referred to as CPM. Now you can charge someone per click, per like, per retweet, or even for some eventual purchase, which is more concrete. So that's why podcasts and sites often give promo codes or links on websites, which will often have some tracking ID when there's an ad campaign. So much to say, in this case, Bell is not paying in CPM, but they're actually getting an interaction for 5 cents, usually a post or a share, but sometimes a video view. And this cost for such an engagement usually varies, but 5 cents is a really good deal. Now, there's no standard for this because how much interaction an ad get will depend on how alluring the content is. Using Twitter's 2017 Q4 numbers, the cost per 1,000 is $5.92. Average CPC, which is a cost per click, works out to be about 36 cents. So an average person can expect to pay about 36 cents for everything that results in someone actually clicking on their post. So having your message interacted with for 5 cents is a really good bargain. So Bell actually does quite well here. Not only that, but for Bell, this is a tax-deductible charitable donation, not an advertisement cost, which has its own financial advantages. But who cares? In this case, Bell is paying to get a good message out there as well as advertising. In this case, it's not about the money to charity alone, but also the message and awareness that matters. I contrast this to the Ice Bucket Challenge, which, while it did raise some money for ALS, largely aimed at increasing awareness for ALS, which in itself has a minor impact on the disease. So the awareness helps in that it makes people aware that they should donate, but knowing about it doesn't change it. To destigmatize mental illness is in itself a primary goal of the campaign. By encouraging the conversation and having people openly speak about their struggles with mental illness, it indicates to those who may be suffering silently that they can seek help, which can mean real tangible improvements for them. So in some but not all cases, awareness of the problem itself can help reduce the problem in many other ways than just making people more likely to donate. So that's sort of a way in which this is good, and I think that's why it's caught on and why a lot of people choose to engage with it. Now, there's no question that this is good for Bell, but if it is an otherwise good and helpful awareness campaign, then one need not necessarily shy away from it. It's a non-zero-sum game, basically. Just because Bell benefits doesn't mean that it's inherently bad. If they lost money, would the cause somehow be better or somehow have more worth? We should worry about the end results. Does Bell care about mental health? Maybe. Does it really matter? Would they be as motivated with the campaign if their brand wasn't all over it? Almost certainly not. So they might not push so hard to have it do so well, and then we might not have it be the success that it is. So as a consumer, you should be aware that you're the target of the advertisement and how a company may be trying to take advantage of you, but also accept that in some cases a transaction can still be good for you or even the cause, even if it serves a corporation's interests. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, so much to say, be aware of social media or email scams. If possible, try to think of what, if any, mechanism might exist for such a chain letter to track what is meant to be tracked. Ultimately, Bell Let's Talk Day is a very successful advertising campaign put on by a huge telecommunications company whose name recognition directly affects their business as they sell directly to you, the customer. It ultimately seems to be a good program which encourages a positive conversation amongst Canadians who are all doing free advertising for Bell.
Including this segment.
Yes.
Well said, Adam. So when I got this message through Facebook,
Yeah.
I assume that has no trackback.
If you got the message through Facebook and it had the video in it.
No.
Okay.
I don't think it did.
So if it didn't have the video, then maybe someone copy and pasted it wrong and they're not able to do anything with it. So the two messages I got had a video attached to it. So they said something like, they'll donate 5 cents for everyone that gets sent to. I think the reality is there's 5 cents for everyone who's used the video. So I think the person who wrote that particular message and misspelled your, that sort of has qualities of a copy-pasted scam letter. And I think some aspect of that message is untrue. But the truth is, if someone watches that video, 5 cents gets donated.
And as you said, there can be a lot of good in here, even if the intentions are not necessarily good or not. But as you also said, it's under a charitable enterprise, at least this subset of what they're doing.
Yep.
So it would be 5 cents up to something they've already allocated. Because if for some reason this went stupidly viral in the tens of billions, you'd be like, well, we're not doing that.
But it did go very viral. I think Bell Let's Talk was the most popular Canadian hashtag on Twitter for last year or something like that.
But they also know it's within what they're willing to spend.
I think after 9 years, they have a pretty good idea of exactly how often it's going to be tweeted, right? I think they've kind of hit a plateau of what they can do with that.
All right, Adam, let's address your issue with CPM. As a native French speaker, I'm surprised that you have an issue with that.
As an English speaker, M means million. So yes, mille is 1,000 in French, and if a French person said CPM as a way to calculate cost per 1,000, I would say that's fine. But when I see CPM, I think cost per million, and I just can't get my brain not to think that.
Right. So it comes from the Latin, i.e. millennium.
Okay.
And it's cost per 1,000.
Right.
Yes.
Well, that answers all my questions, but who's Cecilia Payne?
Well, we recently got this request from a listener named Andrew. Please, could you do a segment on Cecilia Payne, who she was and what she did for astrophysics? She was the awesome. Everyone needs to know who she was and what she did for astrophysics. He's very clear. And he's right, because her contribution was groundbreaking, to say the least. Now, Cecilia Helena Payne Kapotchkin, née Payne in 1900, was a British-born American astronomer and astrophysicist. More notably, she was the first scientist to propose in her 1925 doctoral thesis, so take that in for a moment, guys, she's 25 years old at the time, that stars were composed primarily of hydrogen and helium. Now, this wasn't just groundbreaking, it was radical and controversial because it went against scientific consensus at the time. Namely, there were no significant elemental differences between the sun and the earth. Unfortunately, her thesis was initially rejected and senior astronomers talked her out of presenting it. As we found out later, using independent observation, she was bang on. Now, a bit of background on this badass scientist. At 19, she won a scholarship to Cambridge University, but her interest in astronomy only really peaked after a lecture by Arthur Eddington. He was a British physicist / astronomer / mathematician who took an expedition to the west coast of Africa to photograph stars near a solar eclipse and test Einstein's theory of general relativity. Side note, and not the great podcast from our friends at ASAP Science, but like a real side note, Eddington was responsible for producing one of the earliest confirmations of general relativity. I found this all fascinating, by the way, so thank you, Andrew, for putting this on our radar. Here's what Payne said about that lecture. Quote, "The result was a complete transformation of my world picture. My world had been so shaken that I experienced something very much like a nervous breakdown. Sadly, even though she completed her university studies, Cambridge didn't grant degrees to women until 1948, so no degree for her. Being faced with scant career options other than teacher, she finessed a grant to a U.S. grad program in astronomy at Harvard College Observatory, thanks to a fellowship to encourage women to study there. Not to say there's nothing wrong with teaching, it's just that's not what she wanted to do with her career." Now back to her dissertation. After her explanation of stellar spectra and composition of the sun, she was dissuaded enough from concluding the sun was mostly hydrogen that she subsequently labeled her results as spurious. A few years later, a notable astronomer named Otto Struve said her work was, quote, "the most brilliant PhD thesis ever written in astronomy." And in a classy move, Henry Norris Russell, who had initially urged her not to present her thesis, published findings that backed up her thesis, and he gave her props for her discovery and her work. Her doctoral dissertation was the first from Harvard in astronomy, not just first for a woman, first, and marked, quote, "a turning point in the establishment of astronomy as a field that is independent from mathematics." That's a nice little soundbite from an article on World Science Festival. She stayed at Harvard, and it wasn't until after she had published several books that she finally got the title astronomer as opposed to an assistant in 1938. That's infuriating to me. Despite dealing with many obstacles due to her gender, she went on to become Harvard's first female prof in 1956 and subsequently the chair of the Department of Astronomy and first woman to head a department at Harvard. So needless to say, Payne inspired many women to pursue science-related career paths in a field that was very much dominated by men. After she retired in 1966, she continued to do research at the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory and was also appointed emeritus professor of Harvard. Now, she passed away in 1979 at 79 years old, but in 1977, she accepted the Henry Norris Russell Prize, and I thought a quote from her speech would be a lovely way to end a segment about Cecilia Payne Gabochkin. "The reward of the young scientist is the emotional thrill of being the first person in the history of the world to see something or understand something. Nothing can compare with that experience. The reward of the old scientist is the sense of having seen a vague sketch grow into a masterly landscape."
Thanks, Cristina, and thanks for joining us once again, listeners. Pat gave us the ups and downs of leaving your windshield wipers up or down. It seems to depend on your risk preference and whether you think it looks cool or not. Adam talked to us about the Bell Let's Talk campaign and the pros and cons of something that might be doing something overall good, even though some of the ways in which it might be achieved are suspicious. Click rates maybe worked, maybe didn't, depending on the medium and whether you saw that video or not. And Cristina highlighted the achievements of Cecilia Payne. Thank you, Andrew, for writing in. It's important to highlight the contributions of people we might not otherwise know about. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
Stay classy, not smartassy.
We'll talk to you next week, everyone.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
This is the show for February 5th, 2019. Damn you, Adam. Damn you. Sorry, Pat. Okay. Wait. You're not going to explain what Eddington did?
He produced evidence of the earliest confirmations of general
But
relativity.
He meant specifically the experiment that he did.
No, because it's not about him. It's about Cecilia Payne.
I mean, it's...